Welcome to On the Chain. Tonight we've got a special treat for you. We have none other than Steven Nerayoff. He is going to decouple EthGate, and we're going to jump right into it. Are you guys ready? Let's go.
I'm ready. Let's go.
Welcome to On the Chain.
Welcome everybody down the chain. So I want to just, Steven has a very impressive bio. I'm not going to read it all, but I want to just presence for who we're going to be speaking with tonight. Steven is a internet, AI, and blockchain pioneer. He's also an attorney and venture capitalist with 45 U.S. international patents, which is about 40 more than most human beings have that actually file patents. Steven's been an advisor, an investor in more than 25 leading projects in the blockchain industry, including, of course, Ethereum, tZERO, Polymath, CasperLabs, Lisk, ION, and many more. At Ethereum, Steven was the legal inventor of the utility token and ICO, which evolved later into the IEO and IDO, both of which he did during Ethereum's record-breaking crowd sale. And he's also advised and invested in many of the most prestigious blockchain projects as CEO and co-founder, or I should say founder of Alchemist, leading consultancy investment firm for high-potential blockchain companies. He's also previously founded Maple Ventures, Freedom Eldercare, iOffer.com, Fleetwood Owen, eWanted.com, and Inside Out Guides. Oh, and he's suing the FBI, for which the SEC is involved. Drum roll, please. Welcome, Steven Nerayoff. How are you doing?
Hi, guys. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Chip. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome. Great to have you on with us.
There's so much to unpack, Steven. I mean, we already started talking on the pre-show, and there's just so much to unpack. And as we start getting into it, I'm sure we'll have some questions, but I just want to see, kind of take us up to date. A lot of people that are familiar with what's been termed EthGate, right? If you can just give a general sort of an overview and just your involvement.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say, at the outset, I'm not sure EthGate's really the right terminology because, it really focuses on the protocol, and it's really more focused on the individuals. It's not Ethereum is the code is not the enemy, right? It's the bad actors behind it. So what would you want me to start with? My involvement with Ethereum?
Well, just like a high end overview, like a 20,000 foot. Look at this is because most people are familiar with the story.
Sure. So Ethereum started in 2014. I got involved right at the beginning, and they wanted to sell tokens to the public, and which today is a common thing, but at the time was everybody said would be an illegal, unregistered sale of securities. And so everybody assumed these things called tokens were securities. They didn't understand, could there be another possibility? And I was kind of tasked with trying to figure out how to legally do that. And the story, the short of that is, I came up with a product narrative that, this is actually like a product, like a stamp or gasoline that you put in your car. And so, there's a whole lot of implications about that's beyond this conversation. And then I had to figure out a process of how do you sell this product without turning it back into a security, which that became the ICO. So, I didn't actually realize I had any involvement in the EthGate, until I ended up getting arrested by 12 FBI agents. So I thought I had done, a pretty good job over there. I didn't take anything with me. But I think for people that don't understand what EthGate is, I think you would just jump to 2018, and June 14th, there was a speech by Bill Hinman, Division of Corporations at the SEC, which a lot of people know was the free pass speech. And in that speech, he declared that Ethereum, he actually said, we're going to put aside the ICO. So let's forget about the ICO, because they knew the ICO did turn it into a security, not because of what I did, but because of other actors. But he said, putting that aside, there's this new concept of something could be centralized at one point and therefore a security. So if it's centralized, it's a security for people that don't understand. But if it's decentralized, it's not. And so it can morph over time. Right? And so he's saying that Ethereum did just that. It morphed over time, and it's no longer a security because it's decentralized. Problem is a lot of stuff with that, So I mean, like, that's a high level. And what that did was it put Ethereum. I mean, Bitcoin was already in, like, the promised land in terms of regulatory clarity and as a commodity. He now basically gave most favored nation status to Ethereum and not to everybody else. And so everybody else was, like, put into limbo. Of course, what happened to Ripple was a direct attack, but everybody else was, indirectly being attacked as well.
Well, curious, like, what are your thoughts as far as that speech was very suspect. So what did we see? We saw the hockey stick take off right after
Yeah.
that. I remember seeing Lubin at one of the, I don't remember, one of the conferences, and they had it up on stage. They made a joke about it. They laughed about it, and they watching that happen. But this is what sort of started pumping Ethereum, right? That was like the impetus behind this whole idea of this free pass, right?
Yeah, I mean, that what you're talking about is like 2 hours after Bill Hinman on the same stage in Yahoo Finance. So it wasn't like, and he said, and he acted all stupid. He's like, did they talk about this? As if he didn't know, right? And yeah, I mean, what it did was it basically it did multiple things. Not only all the money gravitated towards it because people felt like it was safe from a regulatory standpoint, but all of the developers went to it as well. And so it basically sucked up like a vacuum everything by that one speech, which the specifics of the speech are just kind of nauseating, and when you look at it in terms of the conflicts of interest involved. But that once that happened, they kind of effectively got a monopoly. I mean, like, a monopoly where, Windows was a monopoly at 90% market share. And that's kind of what Ethereum was, not counting Bitcoin, amongst all the smart contract, protocols out there, they were a monopoly.
Was that by intent, or do you think it was just kind of happenstance that it kind of spun off that way, meaning kind of pre-planned, premeditated, that there was a mechanism, seeing where Bitcoin was, seeing where Ethereum's going, the future of DeFi, digital asset, was that impetus then to say, hey, we think we can control this aspect of it. We can then control the marketplace. You bring up Microsoft, they can control the narrative.
Right. I mean, there aren't very many examples of owning 90% market share and getting a $300-400 billion market cap by accident, right? So like that's by design, right? So absolutely, it was by design, right? And but let me be clear. It's like, I don't like the XRP Army and Charles Hoskinson from Cardano have this like battle, and I really have nothing to do with the battle, right? I know Charles for quite a long time, and but there's this issue about, did Ethereum actually bribe the SEC, and he's saying they didn't, and it's a conspiracy theory, and like, I'm like, okay, so they didn't. That means actually nothing. It's like it's a red herring argument. It's like, you can have you had specifically Bill Hinman, then you had the chairman of the SEC, Jay Clayton, then you had the players on the Ethereum side, then you had venture capitalists that had stakes in companies that were based on Ethereum, going on the Ethereum protocol. So they had a lot of money invested in that. It's kind of like, maybe the best way I could say it is like, you did a bank robbery, right? And a bunch of people are going to rob the bank. Some of the people that are robbing the bank actually happen to work at the bank, right? Like the head of the bank is in on this. The teller is in on this. And then there's a bunch of customers that are acting innocent, and they're like, we don't know what's happening here. And that's like, Joe and Vitalik, and like acting like, wow, the bank is getting robbed. And you know, and then they all walk out, and then they all split the money, you know, and like nobody bribed anybody, right? You know, so I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, but I'm just saying, you know, here's a common interest, everybody benefited in this situation. Bill Hinman went to the #1 venture fund, not saying anything about that fund at all, but that fund, you know, directly benefits from Ethereum benefiting. And Jay Clayton went to a fund that made a huge bet on Bitcoin and Ethereum and divested itself, if I'm not incorrect, of XRP. So both of them went on to very lavish lifestyles afterwards. And you know, and you can imagine, you know, you saw that hockey stick when he said that, right? And it was on the thing. So you can go on to, you know, a ton of different online trading platforms and do 100x leverage. You know, so there's a little known fact that people don't realize. This is June 14, 2018. He only showed this speech to Jay Clayton. June 18th of 2018, there was regulations going in that all employees of the US government had to report their holdings of cryptocurrencies. And he says in his emails that were given by under a FOIA request by Empower Oversight that they were in a rush to do this. And they were like, why were you in a rush to do this? Like, because of 4 days later, you would have to disclose your holdings of cryptocurrencies. So if they were holding Ether, or they made a bet of 100 to 1, and they put $100,000 and made $10 million off of that, or whatever the number is, you know, they would have had to disclose that if he made that speech 5 days later, right? And so it's pretty suspect because there's 4 other members that are sitting on the SEC as, you know, it's not just the chairman, and none of them got to see the speech. And the speech was being prepared over months. You know, so like when you're doing something and an entire asset class is getting affected and nobody else in the SEC is getting to know about this, that just doesn't add up.
And also too, as Ripple, remember through discovery, did end up with the Hinman speech. So, and I remember Brad Garlinghouse calling it out, saying that yeah, it was somewhat significant. But for the FOIA request, and the FOIA requests are great, but sometimes they take a couple of years to actually happen, right? People don't know, they lose the documents. Just out of curiosity, you had called it an ICO, and in your bio, we talked about ICO, that initial coin offering. However, Joe Lubin, Vitalik, they don't really, they never refer to that sale. That, you know, remember there was the anonymous, you could just, you know, make up an email address and there was an anonymous buy, but it's never been referred to by Joe Lubin as an ICO, but they went after a lot of ICOs in 2017, 2018. Remember, there was a big attack on the ICOs, but weirdly enough, they never went after Ethereum either.
Yeah, and I don't recall the biggest producer of ICOs during that boom was a company called Token Foundry, which was owned by Joe's Consensus, which, you know, in case people don't know, I started with Joe. And one day I just kind of looked at him and I'm like, I just flat out said, like, this guy's a sociopath. I don't want anything to do with him. And I left. But so they didn't look like they attacked that. Yeah, they're not referring it to as an ICO. They're, you know, they really don't refer to it at all. If you notice, they kind of just skirt the subject. They just said we're decentralized, right? And there's good reason, because number one, if you look on chain, it's pretty clear that like 2 parties, maybe 3, bought like the overwhelming majority of the ETH. And there was a lot of other funny business going on. Like people like recycled the ETH. In other words, it went into the Bitcoin address, and then it got taken out of the Bitcoin address and then went right back in. And if you listen to my talk with Vitalik, it was clear that only Joe and Vitalik had access to that address. So yeah, I mean, they don't want to talk about that. And Joe also does, I'm sure, not want to talk about some of the receipts that I've dropped, where he took it upon himself to actually write legal documents like the night and 2 nights before the ICO was about to start, And in the documents, he wrote that, you know, for speculative buying, so people don't understand, if this is a product, right? You know, and you want to buy like a barrel of gasoline, it's a product, you know, for you because maybe you want to keep it in your car in case you run out of gas, right? But if you buy a million barrels of gasoline, unless you're like American Airlines, it's not a product to you. It's like it's an investment, right? And so speculative buying should not be allowed. You should only be able to buy as much of this product as that you can actually consume or use. And in Ether's case, that would mean, you know, either sending Ether or feeding the decentralized applications. That's the purpose of Ether. And Joe tried to change that language from prohibited speculating to discouraged. And the lawyers made him change it, you know, the night before. And you know, there's a lot of other stuff I have dropped, you know, so I don't want to go into all the nuances. But you know, let's suffice it to say they don't want anybody looking at that, and frankly, they don't want anybody looking at anything before 2022, right? So, like, you know, when we get to the Gensler stuff and what's happening right now, you know, there's this whole, why don't we just purge everything and put it under the rug and like not and forget it ever happened?
But is that what the Gensler initiative is at this point? Gensler kind of took the reins. You know, we look at what happened 2020 as it pertained to Ripple specific, and they spent 3 years plus going after Ripple, a known entity, known company, try to take down the space as they give this kind of a free pass to everything that was happening within Ethereum. I mean, what happens at this point with a Gary Gensler? You know, is he, you know, we see he's gone after, now he's going after Coinbase. He seems to have it out and trying to control an outcome narrative on the space at large. But it seems more destructive than trying to just focus and say, hey, I'm going to open up a path for Ethereum.
Well, first of all, destructive depends on whose side you're on, right? So, if, you know, Gary Gensler made a speech to his students at MIT, which he taught for a year in 2018, and where he said, if there's a new disruptive technology, the way you deal with that as the incumbents is that you slow it down, you use regulatory capture, like the agencies, and you, like, you know, make it go over 10, 15 years, and you just slow all these startups down until the big incumbents institutions like the, you know, major investment banks can come in and take it over. So make no mistake about it, the US government, the SEC, does not want to get rid of crypto, right? They see the power of crypto. They don't want to destroy crypto. They don't want to ban crypto. They want to own crypto, right? And that's a very different narrative. Now, in terms of like, why is he doing what he's doing right now? I mean, look, there's one thing to say, you know, it's talking about specific players sometimes loses the picture, right? There's you know, I don't know how many documents the CIA still has on JFK's assassination, but they don't announce, you know, but they don't release those. But why? Everybody who could have been involved in that has to be dead, right? Right, because it's the integrity of the institution, right? So
Right.
they're protecting the integrity, you know, and it's like oxymoronic to use SEC and integrity in the same sentence, you know. But that's what he's doing, and he's, you know, he's playing ball. So though he doesn't have his hands not dirty, like in my prosecution, he continued prosecuting me, knowing I was innocent, and his SEC did that. And he continued the lawsuit against Ripple. So it's not like he just came in and was just cleaning up their mess. He made the part of that mess himself. Now, what he's trying to say is, and it's really shifty, he's a smart guy. You know, he's, I think, the youngest person to ever make managing director at Goldman Sachs. He did it like at 30. Like, so, like, you know, don't underestimate this dude. But what he's saying is, I call it the SEC purge. Where he's saying, oh, well, when Ethereum went to proof of stake, and for people to understand, you know, there's two ways to kind of handle protocols for a thing called consensus. And there's one is mining. And so miners do the work to make sure that all the transactions are properly handled. or there's this thing, and the network is secure, and there's this thing called proof of stake, where owners of the actual token stake their tokens in order to secure the network and make sure transactions are accounted for properly and everybody can trust everybody else. And so they moved from this mining, and they're gradually moving over to proof of stake. And his argument is that move has turned it into a security, right? And so I'm not going to argue the merits of that move, because that's like a whole nother conversation, right? But there's pros and cons to that discussion. And what I will say is, what that does is, that move was in 2022. So now think about, if they do that, all of the corrupt activities that happen starting from 2014, from the ICO until 2022, are just get washed away, because they're saying it's a security as of 2022. So why do we need to? They don't need to look at anything beyond that, right? And the way he's doing that is, he gave this is where it gets to be like, people start questioning. If they don't, then wake up, everybody, because you're not living in the country you thought you were living in, because he gives us like this magic bullet license to this company called Prometheum, right? Prometheum is, by its own statements, completely dependent on a Chinese Communist Party, very closely affiliated entity. I mispronounce it, Wanshang, Wanxiang, and that is the same entity that did a huge amount of buying in the ICO, and has a very close relation. And Vitalik, we'll talk about it later, but Vitalik actually went to go work for that entity after I told him, build 2.0 like everybody gave you the money to do, and I gave him a whole plan and everything. And instead of taking my plan, he just takes off for Shanghai for a couple of years and works for Wensheng, and he's their chief scientist of their blockchain labs, and he's working for their subsidiary Fenbushi as a general partner. And like, what happened to you building Ethereum, right?
Right.
So back to Gensler. So he said in 2018 about this thing, and incumbents. What are we talking about? Like, people are missing like some of the really egregious activities. We've got this free speech, past speech, right? But people don't really understand, the actual biggest one is the Dow report, right? The Dow report was so blatantly a securities offering. And it wasn't only a securities offering, it was an illegal exchange, because you could buy and sell the Dow tokens on the Dow. So they're going after Coinbase, a NASDAQ listed company, but they leave the Dow alone, right? They're going after Ripple, when the Dow, just so people understand what this Dow is, you buy Dow tokens, the Dow takes the token, puts it into other companies, and when they make profit, that goes back into the Dow. I mean, it sounds like, what is it? It's a venture capital fund, right? And you're like a little bit of partner. I mean, it's a for-profit, it's a security. I mean, like, there's no argument about it. But they decide, like, we're not going to take any action on it. Now, why did they do that? Because they needed to kind of smooth over the ICO. They needed to smooth over and just say, everything. And that was Bill Hinman 3 months. He got there May 2017. This is July of 2017. He issues this. Name one of, it's like crazy, like one other entity or person in crypto that gratuitously just got this like wonderful, like, you just did something that was illegal, criminal and everything, but like, it's okay. We're just going to like look past it, right? But he needed to do that in order to smooth over this, so he could do the free pass. So it was a two-step process, and that was actually the more egregious one.
Yeah, and so I wanted to ask you about this. You talked about, you put a post on X that it was time to sort of take the SEC's corrupt actions against Ripple and expose them, because it was all done to cover up their own collusion with Ethereum. So speak a little bit to that, and why that action was taken. So why why on the last day you've got the tenure of the previous chair. He goes out. I mean, obviously that was in the works for a long time. We knew that they were trying to settle with Ripple, and then he drops the lawsuit on the way out the door. What do you what do you think is actually behind that? It's a really odd sort of a. Then you had the 3-2 vote, right? Because you had the whole thing is just very suspect.
Listen, there's first of all about these votes on it's all a farce, right?
Yeah.
You know, and people like to say there's a crypto mom, crypto dad, and crypto uncle, and crypto fairy tale, and crypto Santa, and it's all a bunch of garbage, right? Like they're all just they throw in a crypto mom, a crypto dad, so the people feel like they have a voice, right? But they actually don't do anything. But it makes people feel like, oh wow, you're on my side. You're not on my side, right? You know, you're probably worse. Like they're all on the same side. So. What was your question? Was
like, yeah, it's just Jay Clee.
Well, why? Okay, so the Ripple action. You know, the Ripple action is interesting because when I saw the Hinman emails, number one, I realized how careless these people were and how blatant, and like how bold they were. They weren't even hiding their activities because they just never suspected anybody would ever see this. They also never suspected I'd see the light of day, right? And so for people who don't understand, I got indicted for extortion. It was a crime that I proved that the SEC led with the FBI and the DOJ and fabricated the evidence. We proved it in their own letterhead that they fabricated evidence, and I got it dismissed with prejudice. That happens like once and never, right? I mean, there's not even a statistic for that, right? So actually, it's actually unprecedented to show that kind of agency coordination. But what's interesting is when you put together, and this goes back to the point about Charles, right? And it's like, Ethereum doesn't need to bribe anybody because you've got all these players and timeline. And when you add up the timelines, so let me give you an example. May 2017, right? The company that falsely claimed I extorted them, they show up in my life out of nowhere. May 2017, Bill Hinman starts at the SEC, right? And so there's other stuff that happened. So when you go through this timeline and then you look at it and you look at the Ripple timeline, you look at the Ethereum timeline, like, the calls with Joe Lubin and, Bill Hinman, and then you look at my prosecution, they just line up perfectly. I mean, these aren't, but there's a second component to it, is that the players line up perfectly, and these are not the players that should even be involved. So the guy that went, I'll give you an example. Bill Hinman, Mark Berger dropped that lawsuit. In effect, he was kind of like, tasked with doing that, right? December 2010, here's another coincidence, both on the person and the timing side. December, Mark is when Joe supposedly starts talking to Bill Hinman, right? That's also the exact month where this guy, Michael Halady, which was an FBI informant, agent provocateur, that they tried to pin everything on me, entered my life, right? So all of that. Something else happened that month, right? Mark Berger was named to the New York regional office of the SEC, which is the office that was leading the prosecution illegally, because they're not a criminal organization. They're criminal organization, I should say. Let me figure. They are a criminal organization, but they're not allowed to pursue criminal actions. They're supposed to only pursue civil action. But we proved that they were actually behind my prosecution. And Mark Berger was leading the New York regional office, which was the office that was doing this. And they actually took one of their prosecutors, and I was being prosecuted in the Eastern District of New York, that federal court, and they placed one of their prosecutors on loan right at that time, who eventually ended up entering into my case. And he was an SEC enforcement agent, right? But he put them there, this was like, quite elaborate. So add those, that's just one example of like all of that happens, you know, and then again and again and again. You know, what were they trying to do? So like, what was it like? What was their objectives? You know,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I think you've got to look short term and long term. Short term, fraud, right? You know, raping the retail investor. People think that because the market cap of, you know, the total market cap, oh, that's, you know, 2 point whatever billion, and it was 500 million, you know, 5 years ago. Yeah, they're not getting that, you know, like an ICO would come up, it would be $10 billion. They would, you know, sell it all to public because they thought it was like a legitimate, you know, project, and then it would go to like zero, and then they would replace it with another $10 billion one. So the market cap hasn't changed, except $10 billion just got fleeced from the public.
Mm.
And we've estimated, these aren't official figures, but we've estimated, and we don't think we're underestimating at all, that $2 to $3 trillion at least was fleeced from the public through these frauds. And there's all kinds of frauds that they had, you know, going on, and you know, that's a whole nother topic unto itself. So there was that. But that wasn't the real prize. The real prize, this is where Ripple comes in. You know, was it started with cross-border payments. You know, I'm on record. I'm on video. You can find it on my YouTube channel, Nerayoff. And you'll see in 2014, I'm saying that the companies, the 2.0 companies that we should be looking at are companies like Ripple, right? And my talk with Vitalik that I dropped, I keep referring to Brad and Chris as the gold standard in the industry, right? And I said, you know, look, you know, I went to a talk with them, and somebody asked them about, you know, XRP. And I still don't remember if it was Brad to Chris or Chris to Brad, but one of them said, I don't handle that question, he does. You know, and in Ethereum, like every one of the co-founders was answering that question. I'm like, can you guys stop? Like, one of you answer the question? You know, it was a bunch of, you know, it was herding cats. It was a bunch of kids. You know, but the point was that they were so, when I say the gold standard, I mean, even the US government was not going to catch Ripple. They had so much lead time. They were so organized. Chris started an amazing organization, brought Brad on. Brad's an amazing executive, right? And they built, I know some of their early guys, and Joel's like incredible, right? So they had like a really solid team, and they were actually like adults in the room, right? You know, and they weren't like not the smartest guys in the room. They actually may have been the smartest guys in the room, and not dishonest, right? So that's really hard to compete with when you've got, you know, you're dealing with the US, but they've already got contracts with all these countries and all these banks, you know, and they've been doing that for years. So what happened was JP Morgan put this thing called Quorum onto Ethereum. And, you know, I won't go into the specifics, but that was supposed to basically compete with Ripple, right? That did not work out well. But, you know, the only way they were going to stop Ripple was by doing something like, you know, for football fans, it's like an illegal block and tackle, and the ref didn't see anything. You know, in soccer fans, it's like tripping the guy, you know, and you know, the ref didn't see anything. You know, they had to slow them down somewhat. And so, just going one step further from that, once you become, this is very different. Like if you become the cross-border payment, right? So if I want to take dollars, and they're going to be crypto, and I was the first person to say countries are going to come out with crypto dollars, and they're known as CBDCs, central bank digital currencies today. When you, under this new system, what happens is you take a dollar, it goes through an XRP, basically. I'm simplifying this, right? You know, kind of, you know, and then it comes out, you know, and then there's a ledger and whatever. But now, if you're the currency, and you don't have to call it, you don't have to say the currency. If you're like the thing that all the other currencies have to go through to get to each other, like how far is that from you becoming the actual reserve currency yourself, right? And it's really not that far of a jump, right? And so it's pretty clear that, to me, that their goal was ultimately to take over the monetary system. But so they saw they did have already had control of the monetary system. What they saw in crypto was a way to capture the monetary system in a draconian way that they were never able to. And what I mean by that is, like, we would not have cash anymore, and every single transaction we do, we'd have no privacy. Every transaction we do, they would know every single transaction we do. We'd lose all privacy, and they would completely control international. That's bad enough, but the fact that they're doing this with two CCP entities, which I maybe I didn't emphasize this enough. Both of these CCP entities, but the one that invested in and controls effectively Ethereum, and this Prometheum that Gary Gensler gave this unexplainable magic bullet license to that nobody else could get, are both controlled, right? And they're both controlled by the same exact CCP entity in China. So, like, why are we bending over backwards to benefit the Chinese Communist Party to take over the monetary system, or to do any of this, right? Like why would you even give the license to them? And they don't even have a product. I mean, it's a joke of a. I don't know them, but like, they don't have a product. But I know I architected tZERO, right? And tZERO is the gold standard in that industry. And it's now owned by the New York Stock Exchange. New York Stock Exchange, in most part, it's like they've taken a majority interest or whatever. And that was started by Patrick Byrne from Overstock, right? And he was years ahead of his time, just brilliant man. Yep. But they don't give it to something that's owned by the New York Stock Exchange, that has products, that has been approved by the SEC, that's been around since 2015, and they give it to this other company that has no product, no technology, nothing. The guy is like pretty much an idiot. It goes in front of Congress and lies blatantly in front of Congress.
Which guy?
And it's controlled by the same CCP entity. So I don't know if anybody in the comments wants to ever give me an explanation for this. There's no other explanation that I can think of.
It seems like there's so many things that were all going on simultaneously, as you brought up, and so we have the lawsuit against Ripple, and then we fast forward a couple, you go through 3 years of that. We have FTX rises out of nowhere and becomes the darling of the U.S. government, with SBF being invited in front of Congress and becomes a congressional darling, and the one they brought in to consult on the writing of some sort of legislation. And obviously then you have a lot of inner fighting, SBF going after Celsius, and you have the takedown of Celsius, and then you have CZ from Binance going after SBF, essentially, which takes down SBF and FTX, and now we see CZ's getting jail time. So there's all these big exchanges, a lot of funds, getting pushed through all of this as well. But it just seems there's a lot of things going on in the background, a lot of chess pieces being moved around the board, and a lot of control.
So I mean, you're hitting on a lot of themes, but like I'll just pick two of them, right? One is they wanted to control the exchanges, right? So CZ got 4 months. In my opinion, CZ got 4 months more than he should have gotten, right? He was actually, I'm not saying he didn't do anything wrong. I'm not saying like he was perfect, right? But he was actually running. He was actually running the best exchange out there, right? And what they've now accomplished to do is they've got U.S. Personnel inside, and they're controlling Binance now, right? I mean, Binance is now an agency of the United States government, basically. That's effectively what it is, and so that's what they're trying to do. The Coinbase one and the Kraken one, those are different stories. They drove BitChex completely out of business, I mean, again, look at the way they're dealing with the, the regular securities. For the most part, there's smaller exchanges that really don't matter much, but it's the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange, right? And the government has control over the two, right? And they don't like the fact they didn't have control over this, right? They wanted to be able to control it. Now this is how they control it. And CZ's got, whatever, he's got his tens of billions of dollars. So like, I guess a lot of people would go to jail for 4 months for tens of billions of dollars, right? But the FTX situation, now that's a totally different situation. I couldn't speak up about it because I was in the middle of my prosecution, but I spoke to a lot of people privately. And some of us, the term is like OG, like that we've been around, forever. Like another term is like we're old, we could see, like it was so clear to us that we're like, this guy's not one of us. Like we just knew this guy's a phony. And so like, if you've ever been in a club, where, like a fraternity, something where you're like, you're all, have some common thing. And then some outsider comes in, and you're like, that's not one of us. He doesn't belong here, right? And so that was FTX. Like he just didn't belong there. Now, aside from the fact that none of the whole story is preposterous, right? Like it's just nonsense, right? It's just like, and then you've got, all of these politicians and whatever, involved. But what FTX did, though, accomplish, and this wasn't lost on some people, was they used FTX, whether you want to say they were involved in it or not, doesn't even matter. They used FTX to decimate the industry. Right, so I wasn't involved in Celsius, but I actually introduced Alex Mashinsky to, he had a very good background before, and voice over IP, and I knew him for many years, and he came into crypto, and I helped him with Celsius, and then I backed out. I had nothing to do with anything after that. But taking down Celsius, taking down what was the wallet that they took down?
The Bitcoin wallet.
No, it was another one, but they were able to do a, when you collapse a building, it's like a controlled destruction.
Yeah.
Right. So this was like a controlled destruction, except nobody realized that there was a dynamite going off at the bottom of the building and on each floor of the building, and each floor of the building was another crypto company that was going to get blown up. And it's really interesting. So that why was Sam, acting like Morgan's, the Morgan Stanley of the day, and being like, I'm going to save this one, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to save that. So now he's got stakes in all of these where they can actually help take them down. The actual fact that CZ was the trigger, I'm not convinced that was actually intentional. And CZ didn't want to be bringing, because that brought a lot of attention onto CZ. So that's not, I don't think he expected, that to unfold so quickly.
Well, but he pulled the carpet, just like SBF pulled the carpet from Celsius, right?
A little bit, but the money laundering part. So the
SBF pulled the carpet under the crypto industry. Yeah, that's what he did, right? And what kind of really infuriates me is that Vitalik has the gall to go on and call him a virtual signaler. And for people who don't know what that is like, that's somebody who pretends that they're somebody that they're not, to look good on social media, but they're actually, kind of like, a vampire in the background. And, the vampire of all vampires, figurehead of all figureheads, Vitalik, who doesn't even control his own, most of the time, I don't think he controls his own X account, is calling this guy out. And of course he is, because he's deflecting from himself. I'm a good guy, right? If I call him out as a bad guy, then I'm a good guy, right? And whenever you have somebody who's constantly talking about how good they are, right? Like that's a problem. Like if you're a good person, you don't really need to tell people you're a good person, right? People should be able to see that through your actions. On the other hand, when you put out a roadmap, and that roadmap has this thing called a purge, which effectively deletes all data beyond a year, unless you can run your own node, which is like really freaking hard, but like the average person couldn't just access it with, tools, that are online tools. Like, why is he doing that? Right? Like, what are you trying to hide? And then I released a video with Joe Lubin saying, and I didn't realize it until recently, and I just kept listening to it. And I'm like, wait a minute, what is he saying here? He's saying, it's kind of like the blockchain. You don't have to have a trail if you don't want to. And I'm like, what am I hearing here? Like that's exactly what the blockchain is not supposed to be. Like, it's supposed to be immutable. You're supposed to have a chain, like from day one. Like, we can see Satoshi's, the Genesis block, and the newspaper and everything to this day, and we'll see it, into eternity.
Well, I just want to say one thing about FTX, though. The FTX was a great money laundering, because when money went to Ukraine went back over to the Bahamas, and then that money got filtered through to everyone's pocket, both Democrats and Republicans. The most of it went into old Joe's campaign. So that's kind of how it went. It went into the residents' campaign. So there was a lot of that. That's why you had Maxine Waters blowing kisses to Sam and the.
I don't understand.
Well, it's already been proven. I mean, it's already out there. It's not whether the money didn't go to Ukraine, the money came back. Now, you can't say it was the same money, but it looks awful suspect, right? I mean, I wanted to get into this question.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, because this is something I was wondering about too, but Rob McDermott says, did you know Roger Ver? And if you did, what were your impressions of him?
Oh, wow. But wait after this, I'm about to make a post. I had dinner with Roger last week.
No kidding.
Right? Oh. No, we were in Dubai like 5 days ago, and we had dinner. And Roger and I know each other since, I think, 2010. And when I saw that news, I immediately texted him. I didn't get a text back. I didn't realize he was in jail. Right. And so I texted a mutual acquaintance of ours, and, not going to go into the details, but like a little known fact is like, this wasn't the first time I beat the DOJ. The DOJ came after me, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court on not a criminal charges, but they said I did a tax shelter, and we won. There was like 5 of our cases. But it's the same division in the DOJ. And yes, well, it's crazy, because Roger and I were talking about this exact issue. We were talking about us getting targeted. So like, when I got arrested and got thrown in a van, and yes, I was the main target because I could reveal this whole EthGate thing. But while they had me, they figured, one of my attorneys said, like, you're Sammy the Bull, except you didn't kill 100 people. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, Sammy the Bull, I gave him the whole roadmap and got everybody turned in, right? And he's like, so they want you to do that because they think this is like the mafia, you can turn everybody in. And I said, well, can you tell them to go F themselves? And like, because I'm not. So they gave me this list, and Roger, it was like page and page and pages and pages and pages. And I remembered the people that like I was friends with or that I knew well. And Roger was like I told him, I'm like, your name was, I think, like number 3 on that list. Like, I don't know if it was in order. It looked like it was in order of importance, right? And so, he's no friend. He went from Crypto Jesus to Crypto Judas, and I think he got an unfair shake on that. But I was looking at LinkedIn today, and I can't. I experienced this firsthand, where when I got arrested, everybody, like people that were my friends and people that I helped and I got into the business and made money for and like changed their lives, were like, oh, this scumbag, and like as if they never knew me, right? And we knew it all along that he was this, and we knew this, right? And I'm like, well, apparently it turns out you didn't know it, right? Like, so like, that didn't age very well, right? And I go on LinkedIn today, and there's this guy, putting up a post about saying how evil Roger is, and it's great that they finally caught him. And I'm like, like, what the hell happened to innocent until proven guilty? It doesn't exist in this country. It does not exist.
It doesn't. And I texted Jeff, and I said, Jeff, here's a shakedown right here. Here it is right here. It's been in the works for years, and we kind of went back and forth on it, but that's immediately what hit my mind. I mean, this is a guy that was driven by conviction, a guy who was driven by what he believed was the best. And there's a lot of them out there, right, that believe in the greater good. Like you said, he went from Bitcoin Jesus to Bitcoin Judas, right? Because he switched his allegiance. But I don't think that part of it matters. I think the part that addressed the decentralization, and I think the decentralization being the real threat to really, when you break it down to government, it was great in the 1700s when you had to send someone to Washington to represent you, but you don't need that really with the blockchain anymore. So that whole idea of decentralization really does put the power back in the people. And you hear JFK or RFK Jr., I should say. I saw that you had reposted that about him saying, let's put everything on the blockchain. They wanted to do that. They wanted to do traces with the money going to Ukraine, but that is a money laundering scam too. So it gets fueled back into these entities, and
60 billion.
And nobody can trace it after a while. Then it goes in the yachts, and we're funding all kinds of stuff. So, but it really goes to show you that it's at what you've exposed, and I think what really comes down to, especially with going after the FBI, because the SEC there will be some discovery in that. I think this is probably going to be one of those landmark cases where, and I would say this, I'm not that I'm going to be in trouble anytime soon, but I think if I am in trouble, I think I want Steven Nerayoff on my side, because you being able to, several times display, and then plus your 40 patents. I mean, it is remarkable that when you think about guys like Roger Ver going down, it coming up in the documentation, like you could say, well, it's kind of circumstantial, but it does seem to be a target of some kind. And I don't know if he actually was some tax evasion, but isn't that what they got the mafia guys on? They could never.
Yeah. From what I understand, there's a lot more to this story. I'm not at liberty to speak. And it looks like there was very much bad faith on the side of the U.S. government. So I gave Roger the benefit of the doubt. I give anybody in crypto the benefit of the doubt, because we're all targets, right? And I experienced it firsthand. But this one in particular, I happen to have some information that, it looks like, Roger was, this was very much trying to take him out for their reasons, right? They've gone after individuals, and then they've gone after the companies, but don't forget that what you're talking about in terms of the laundering of the money, imagine how much of that may have been done on Ethereum, right? Like, so there's obvious stuff that people, if you look back at the ICO, and I was able to give the list to some folks so they could actually identify the wallets, of who got what, and it was just like clear, obvious stuff. We saw a wallet. Somebody showed me a wallet that had Lubin.eth in it that gave gas to the black hacker of the DAO, right? Which is today, like, I don't know, $10 billion or something. Yet Laura Shin writes a front page cover story in Forbes pointing to this Toby guy from 10X, and the poor guy, like that guy had nothing to do with this, right? And like, it's right on chain right there. Now, from a legal standpoint, Joe could just say, yeah, well, and I can tie that wallet to him. Just the fact that it has Lubin.eth doesn't mean it's his, right? But I have a way of tying it to his Genesis wallet, meaning the wallet he originally got, his original Ether. It ties into that. So there's no doubt it's his wallet. But he's like, I was running a big company. I didn't know who was doing what, right? And so you get into a court of law and you prosecute somebody, and you have a beyond a reasonable doubt standard. How are you going to get somebody prosecuted like that? On the other hand, what made me dangerous, especially I became more dangerous because I didn't realize I was dangerous when they were trying to take me out, was that I had documentation that at the time of the Hinman speech, both Vitalik and Joe knew that Ethereum was not decentralized according to its own documents that were signed by Vitalik. And they said this, they went into the SEC under oath. So you're not only talking about securities fraud and all kinds of fraud, but like you're also talking about, 1001, lying to, federal agents kind of fraud too. So the fact that they allowed them to make that speech, and the only person, I have the chain of custody, and you look at the email and it's like Joe, Vitalik, me, and the lawyer, right? So like, who's the odd man out? And the only thing I can say is I turned down the equivalent, in a match. And if anybody hasn't seen, you can go to my Twitter accounts at Stephen Nerayoff, and you can see O'Keefe, talk about this. And I gave up the equivalent of 1 million ETH, and I don't only, people are like, oh, you feel bad about that. I'm like, no, I'm grateful forever that I did that, even if it was $3 billion, because my integrity is intact, right? I didn't take anything. I actually spent money on it, right? So,
Stephen, how did O'Keefe come? How did that come across? Because that's really high profile when James O'Keefe, and like, how did that come? That was a great report, the way he put that together. But was there a conversation? Because did he actually consult you, or did he pick this up, or how did that come to be? Did he report?
No, so I think look, the XRP army in particular, but I can't limit it just to them. There are a lot of other people in crypto that are good people that were, joining in on this, what I call what other people call decentralized justice. And it's really an example of that. And I have to tip my hat to them because, they actually helped me fill in blanks, right? So when I came in, I'm sorry, you were saying, I just lost you for a second.
Oh, did you lose us for a second?
Yeah, I just lost the hearing for a second.
Okay, maybe.
Can you just repeat what you were saying?
Question, Chip.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the question exactly? I'm trying it's like one of those things where you're like, what the heck was the question?
It was perfect timing.
What do you remember what it was, Jeff? I'm completely lost here. I was like, you just like caught me off guard. What was the damn question? I mean, Jeff, I rely on you to
I know, I kind of spaced out on that one too.
We talked about so many things, so it's
there was a lot that we kind of factored into it.
No, I talked about James O'Keefe. So the whole idea.
James O'Keefe. Let me tell you about James O'Keefe. So I think what happened was when I broke free and I came public, like belief got real, right? They could call the XRP army conspiracy theorists, and they did. And so there was this fringe thing going on, but they couldn't call me a conspiracy theorist. And I dropped the receipt, and the ones that tried, every time they tried, I dropped another bomb of a receipt, and then you notice they shut up because they're like, we don't want them dropping any more receipts, right? Like, and I was like, go ahead, just bring it on, because I've got another 10,000 receipts here. They don't realize how much, I did more to build Ethereum, the foundation, than any of these people. But I don't. It's not taking credit away from a lot of people like Gavin Wood and Anthony Delorio. There's a lot of people that did amazing stuff there. But James O'Keefe, when I came onto the scene, somebody brought it to his attention. And so I think when it got, that like kind of made it real. And so it wasn't about me so much, but it was like, now you actually have an inside whistleblower that was actually, I wasn't just kind of there. I was like, I was doing the stuff, the work. Joe would hand everything to me and said, I don't know what the hell this says. Can you figure it out? He's not the smartest bulb in the world, right? And so O'Keefe was doing that story with or without me, right? I didn't actually, believe it or not, I actually did not consult with him really that much on it. We had a conversation, and his staff asked me to send over specific things that they wanted. They had looked at my X account, and they had some people that were EthGate, Stephen getting falsely prosecuted experts kind of thing. And they asked me for specific documents. I sent the documents over there. So I really had no idea what was happening. What I do believe is he understands, and this is like really like important, that not only was my case unprecedented, the corruption that we've uncovered here is unprecedented. I mean, it's really the corruption of history, and then the fraud that happened online. That's unprecedented. You got three unprecedented stories, and and that's not lost on James, right? He's a sharp guy, and so I can't speak for him, but he made it pretty clear that this was the first installment of many more installments to come. And so I personally have nothing to gain at this point, and nor did I ever have anything to gain, right? This was, only harming me. People are like, oh, you're doing it for your reputation. A lot of people are like crypto, think, they hate me. Oh, you're hurting the price of Ether. And I'm like, you think I'm hurting the price of Ether? If they had listened to me and done dApps, Ether would be at $100,000 right now, right? I'm like, don't look at them. They're the ones that were stealing all your money, right? So it's just people's perspectives, right? And nor do I believe actually the price of Ether is caring what I'm doing, because they control the price of Ether. They own almost all of it, so they can make it go any way they want, right? And I'll just finish with this. This whole consensus lawsuit is just like, are you kidding me? Like, it's like, I mean, if there's any more smoke and mirrors, let's all pretend like we're enemies now, because we're covering this all up. So let's pretend like we're at each other's throat. And Joe, I watched Joe's interview, and he was on a good podcast. It was Bankless. I respect those guys. So it wasn't them. It was Joe and Matt Korber, who I've known, both for a long time. And Joe keeps saying, we're getting gaslighted. We're gaslit, right? And I was like, it's interesting Joe used that term so much and is so familiar with that term, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's so appropriate for what he's been doing. And now, ultimately, I think they know the gig is up, right? I presented this document. So when we talk about a court of law, beyond a reasonable doubt, and criminal prosecution, I don't know how they get past this document. This document shows it wasn't decentralized. They went in, they let Hinman make the speech, and then after the speech, like you said, they said we're decentralized. And then they continued saying that since 2018 until the current day. And so it's like an ongoing fraud. It's actually like a RICO case, which is kind of crazy with the government. So I think this is just part of the cover-up. I think it's just smoke and mirrors.
There's so much going on, within from an economic perspective, everything that's going on from the crypto, and we're seeing how the SEC and, like you said, FBI and other players trying to manipulation of the presidency, right? 2020, and now we're seeing it again unfold for 2024. Complete manipulation of a political outcome, complete manipulation of the future of economics and finance. They're trying to, it's a power struggle. The one thing Chip and I always talk about, there's always politics and economics involved in everything. And this conversation, definitely unfolds even more in depth. We hit the hour that we hit, that you allotted us. I know when we first started, we talked about this being a part one and being able to invite you back on for a part two. If you have some time to continue a little bit more, that'd be great.
Sure, we can continue.
I'm sure Chip has another.
Yeah, one thing to what you're saying is I personally, I've been an entrepreneur for quite a long time, and I would always tell people that I work with, I'm like, don't come to me with a problem if you don't have a solution, right? And so I thought about this quite a lot before I came public, right? And I said, what's the solution here, right? And so I do believe in the promise of crypto, right? And crypto levels the playing field for the average person, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, that's a mission. And when I say, like, I think there are a few people that say I'm willing to die on this hill, like, and actually it's like really mean it, but that's what I'm willing to die on this hill, right? And because it's just getting worse and worse and worse for the average person.
Purposely.
But beyond all of this, to me, there's a lot of hope, right? And I'm not going to go into all the specifics, but I do have a plan. I call it Crypto 2.0, where it's going to give power back to the people, where it's going to have true decentralization, where it's going to have checks and balances in it, where it's going to have proper regulation. And so I have a whole plan designed. I haven't presented it yet, but we're trying to get these guys out. And hopefully get some regulators in that are going to be reasonable, and then in 10 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, crypto will start fulfilling its promise. So far, we haven't had a single dApp, right? So like imagine your phone, and it's like a phone. Like how crazy would people go if this just turned back into a phone right now, right? Like you would lose your mind. Like, right. And so by looking at everybody's, screen time, that's what crypto basically has become. It's just trading, and it's like the best analogy I can use is like we invented electricity, and instead of going ahead and creating, the Industrial Revolution, let's just sit around and trade electricity all day long. Like, forget about the Industrial Revolution and advancing society. Let's just let you buy and I'll sell electricity, and that'll be it.
Yeah,
one quick question: if XRP was not a security, then it's a commodity. What about ODL? What about on-demand liquidity, the product for Ripple that actually does use ETH inside the on-demand liquidity?
Right.
What's your thought on that?
I mean, look, it's more nuanced, right? It's, and so it's my opinion is not what really matters. It's like
on the chain.
Well, no, but what I'm trying to get at is, so I tokenomics, like I'm kind of like, a lot of people call me the grandfather of tokenomics, right? And whenever I did tokenomics, I was like, in 5 years, when the SEC comes after us, where are they going to be, like in their policy? And I have to like design for that, and so like the questions you're asking me is like, in 2-3 years from now, where is a federal judge going to be? And in this particular answer, I don't think it's going to be a security, right? And and even going back to like, staking, I think a lot of this stuff's going to get reviewed, right? And a lot of this stuff is going to make, what we've seen is federal judges at district court levels. We haven't seen yet the circuits speak, right? And the circuits are going to be really loud. And then if we get a split in the circuits, I would not be surprised, of an issue of this magnitude that this gets pushed up to the Supreme Court, right? So, this is a longer battle. We're trying to short circuit it. I'm doing everything in my power to short circuit it as much as I can. What I will say is there are good actors in the space, right? Ripple to me is a good actor in the space. They're acting professionally, right? They're doing things by the books. They did everything the SEC asked them to do, right? Ethereum did none of that stuff, and yet they get the free pass, right? And then you have all these other people like, defending them, and it's kind of like inexplicable. Like, why are you defending them? Other than unless you're concerned about your own protocol, being considered illegal, and I also another argument that I want to dismiss. Like, people have said, Charles has said this, and some others have said it. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense because Ripple's not a smart contracts platform, and Ethereum is, so they're not competitors. Well, number one, Ripple actually created smart contracts, and Vitalik stole it from them, and that's just like a fact, right? So, but number two, and Ripple's doing things that, either smart contract or not, is effectively doing a lot of the same functionality as smart contract. But the question is that the competition that they were trying to eliminate? Like, why are you focusing on one aspect of the, or was it more the monetary system and controlling the money supply, right? And the threat that they posed, and they were using Ethereum. So they may have not been direct competitors at one point, but they turned Ethereum into Ripple's competitor, and now they had to get rid of Ripple. right? So that's, let's put an end to that nonsense.
It's amazing. And also, and Chip and I had said pretty much from day one when the lawsuit was filed, it in appearance, we said, at some point, we're going to be buying a box of chocolates for, members of the former SEC as the fastest path to regulatory clarity. And so it was kind of dropped at a moment where the Token Taxonomy Act had been introduced twice and just died in committee. Didn't even get to discussion. Gets to the Financial Services Committee, they sweep it under the carpet, and there is no political path still today to provide any type of regulatory clarity. Here we are 3 years in, and we already have XRP by at least one judge deemed as a non-security. Fast path to clarity. We don't know where the rest of it goes, but it's the only asset that has any kind of legalese attached to it,
I
which,
agree.
like you said, could end up at the Supreme Court. Bitcoin, Ethereum, they can say all they want. XRP is the only asset that's gone through this path.
And it's really interesting because I worked with Warren Davidson on the Token Taxonomy Act. The Token Taxonomy Act is based specifically on my analysis of utility tokens, and and he basically took my analysis and created a safe harbor exception, and it made all the sense in the world. And he called me and he said, can you take a look at this and give me your thoughts, because it's kind of like your creation. And I said, no, it's, and I gave him things that, so his intention was in the right place. Why did that die in committee, right? I mean, it's, you have, I just got back. Well, I mean, yeah, right. So I mean, it was a little bit of a rhetorical question, but yeah. I mean, I just came back from Dubai, and Dubai has a very rigorous but clear regulatory regime, and it's not easy to get through, right? But if you want to be an exchange, here's your application. There's a lot of stuff. It'll take you a year, and it's going to be a lot of work to do, but it's really clear. And after a year, you're an exchange, and you know exactly what you're responsible for doing. You know exactly what you can and do and can't do, what the government expects from you, and you're clear. And now you can run your business. And like, that's kind of like any business, any regulated business, right? I mean, car manufacturers, you've got way more, than that. So one of the things that I think they were unhappy with me was, I thought, look, I think of myself as a deep patriot, right? Not only of the United States, of a citizen of the world, right? But certainly, I live in the United States, and there's so much egregious stuff going on here. And what I did with the utility token and the ICO, I thought was a good thing, because I was providing clarity to people how to do this under the United States securities laws. I didn't show people how to skirt the laws. I showed people, here, if you want to get under the securities laws, here's a path to do that. Well, it turns out they did not like that, right? And because it kind of put a shield, when this industry was embryonic, it put a shield over it in the utility token, because they couldn't get past that product narrative. And then with the ICO, none of this did I intend, so I'm not trying to take credit for it. I'm just saying what actually ended up happening is that the ICO allowed the industry to go raise tens of billions of dollars, and they're like, whoa, this is not a good thing, right? The incumbents are like, this is going to be a lot, like, I don't know what it's called, one something fire turned into a four fire, right? And yeah, and so the heat got a lot higher, because now all of a sudden the industry had strength of its own, right? And so they don't want regulatory clarity. When they want regulatory clarity is when they have control of the major assets, and then the regulatory clarity will be given, and the incumbents will take over.
Well, there we go. That's I mean, I don't want to keep you too long because I definitely would love to have you back, and there's so much to really unpack with Stephen. It was really phenomenal having you here because there were so many questions in the chat that we probably do a whole other show because there were some really strong questions. Unfortunately, we'd be here for 3 hours, and Stephen agreed to one, and he's already been generous and given us an extra 15. So what we'll do is probably have you back. But man, what a phenomenally having you here and being able to kind of unpack some of this stuff. And you connected some dots for me that were kind of missing as well. So it's great to get you. I mean, there's other things I'd love to ask you that have nothing to do with this, just because you said the Patriot, and we'll get to it another time.
You can do a rapid fire 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Rapid fire.
A rapid five. So let's go. Let's go in 2025, and let's say there's a new administration, and let's say you've got this Federal Reserve out there and the Treasury, right? So you saw that Trump put he did some things with the Treasury, but I'm just curious, do you think that the Federal Reserve, and do you think that we finally get rid of a central bank? And do you think if that happens, do all the central banks fall? Because it's a massive debt interest that's enslaved every country in the world to this date. Do you think something like that could potentially happen?
Rapid fire question.
So what altered my life was reading The Creature from Jekyll Island, right? When I was in college, right? And so, that was like, what's going on here? Like, this is not federal. Like, this has nothing to do with the U.S. government. And like, why did we just hand over, right? So no, I don't think the Federal Reserve going away anytime soon, right? But not that I'm happy about saying that, right? On the other hand, I think we can exist. There's this. Let me put it this way: it's going to be a slow process. Do I think the Federal Reserve's days are numbered? Yes, I think they're numbered, right? I think all of these institutions are numbered. If anybody remembers the USSR the day before Gorbachev signed the paper, right? We thought it was a superpower equal to us, and then all of a sudden it comes down, and we realized the whole thing had been decaying from the inside, and there was no bread on the shelf. Right? All of these institutions, they're like that. They're like one breath, one event from collapsing, right? So I'll correct myself a little bit. Possibly no, right? The right event could cause that, right? I'm not, but I wouldn't count on that by 2025. That being said, what?
The beginning.
Well,
the beginning of the end.
I think the beginning. No, I think the beginning of the end started already.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, at a minimum, you have to mark 2009 when Bitcoin got released as the beginning of the end. Right. So that would, I would say, be the minimum, the date. But things, in hindsight, nobody thinks about, 1600 to 1623. Right, or 1610s to 1612, right? Like in the 1600s, there was Napoleon did XYZ, right? And so in history, this is going to be really fast happening, but to us, it's really slow moving. But do I think, in the next 20 years? What I do think is this. Here's the key. I think we're in for an unprecedented time. What you're going to see is a massive move in a alternative system. And crypto is going to be a lead in that, but it's not the only part of that, right? And there's going to be this incredible move for this alternative system. At the very same time, you're going to see a massive increase in technocracy, right? And that's government control, government controls, government invasions of your privacy and all of that. And so, for people who think that we're so different than China, wake up, we're not. Right, we're just like McDonald's. We have a Ronald McDonald that makes us look more, friendly, right? But believe me, I experienced it. So you're going to have these two competing things going on. If I had to give it a time frame, I'd say it probably takes 10, 20 years, for those to play out. Which one wins? Well, which one always ends up winning, right? If you have an open one that the people want. Right, every single empire eventually got overthrown. Right, it got taken over by another empire, but eventually the people overthrew it. Right, and the open source nature of this, what's going to happen? It's going to consume the other side. Right, and we're not even talking about things like decentralized government, right? Like we haven't even, the biggest hurdle in crypto that people don't understand in blockchain in general is not the technology, it's governance. Governance is really the hard problem. That's going to take us a hard. How do we actually govern when there's no central entity? Like there's no white guy up there that makes decisions that we go to war, right? And one of the reasons that I'm building this immersive AR experience we call Clone is that it's giving society a chance to re-question its values. Like, is war, like, we never got a chance because we just got passed on from generation to generation. So like the same thing with the Federal Reserve. It's just kind of got passed on, so people have just kind of accepted it, right? Well, now let's say you go into a virtual world when there's no Federal Reserve, there's no war, and people get to decide, by democracy, like not democracy like the way we have it now, but like everybody has one vote in the world. Like, is war allowed? Like, nobody's ever asked that question. Like, what if, like, we just say war is just not allowed? Like, why do we have rules of engagement? Like, I mean, it's kind of preposterous when you think about it. And then the Federal Reserve. So I think I don't like to use the word metaverse, right? It's an immersive experience, and it's going to be like a digital twin of the earth. I think once people experience that and experience, like they're in the water now, and if you take them out of the water and they realize there's an alternative way of thinking, then that's going to increase this alternative system, right? And so that's my goal, right? And to increase this alternative system, and this alternative system hopefully is like Pac-Man, and it eats all these balls of like the regular system, and eventually that collapses.
You always have a balance of good versus evil. Human nature inherently embraces one or the other. Even though we're born good, through free will, they embrace one or the other.
Good doesn't exist without evil. That doesn't mean you need to pick evil.
Right. I like the idea where war doesn't exist because it's that power struggle. It's a great way to make a lot of money if you're in the right spot. It's a good gig if you get it, but usually you're positioned in a nice spot. It's a lot of, that's a whole other conversation. But that was on my head, Jeff. I don't know if you had anything, but I think that was all I had.
That was a great question. I think it kind of puts us in a nice spot. Although Rob McDermott did put a rapid fire question.
Sure.
Stephen, who or what do you think is Satoshi? And then does Bitcoin last long term? That would be the second part of it. Is that an entity or an individual?
It's an individual. I'll leave it at that.
Wait, what was
an individual? It's an individual.
Sounds like
Satoshi is an individual.
Sounds like you're in a know there, Stephen.
I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Do I believe Bitcoin will last long term?
Long term.
Bitcoin's actually very concentrated. And interesting, that document that I talked about Vitalik signing, the reason that they did, the whole point of them trying to decentralize is because they said Bitcoin was not decentralized. For the first 25% of all Bitcoin went to just a handful of few people, right? And so it's still pretty centralized. And this ETF, great for price, not really great for the ethos of Bitcoin, right? And I'm a huge proponent of Bitcoin, and I see all the building coming on the layer 2s and ordinals, all of that, and I'm a huge believer in that, right? But it's at this point, it's like saying, is the gold ETF going to survive, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm like, BlackRock's in on the deal, and I have nothing against BlackRock. I think they're, I'm pretty impressed with what Larry Fink has been able to do. I'd rather him be running the country than the Federal Reserve. But it's more, it's now in the incumbent's hands. The question, I think, maybe is, does Bitcoin survive in the same way as we knew it to be? And I think the answer to that is probably not exactly. No, I think it's going to get compromised. Although, it kind of always was. There were 51% attacks. just like, the Chinese miners, to like, just to show their strength. They would do it for 10 minutes and then pull back, just to show like, don't mess with us. We could do it. It's not in their interest to do it. Obviously, it would collapse the whole network. For people who don't know, the 51% of tax is basically, you for really high level, you take over the network, but then that loses trust and like the whole network collapses. So, there's nobody, it's no incentive to do it, right? Unless you're looking to destroy the network. They want to turn this into an asset class. The question is, I think, what does it become? It's not a store of value. It's a speculative instrument right now. And does it get to, the euro, the dollar, or yuan, or like in the $20 trillion, depending if you look at M1, M2, M3, but like $20 trillion area, so Bitcoin's got a long way to go to get there, and a long way to go to get stability in order to meet those. The flip side of that argument is it Bitcoin's instability, or is it the dollar's instability that's causing it? I think it's a little bit of both. I do believe it survives. Whether or not it actually becomes a currency is more likely than ever right now, because the incumbents control it. And who do you think is doing all this buying, right? And who do you think is going to be doing all, whatever the mining is left, right? So how much of the public ends up owning Bitcoin? GLD has never been audited to my understanding, the gold of the ETF, right? And so how much of that is actually owned by the public? How, the Fort Knox I don't believe has ever been checked. How much gold do we still own, right? And do we own it? Like who owns it, right? Does our government even own it? So my point is like, are the incumbents going to own Bitcoin, and it survives and maybe even becomes an alternative currency, but it loses its ethos for what we thought it would be.
Interesting. Well, we got an extra half hour. Appreciate that, but we'll have another one. And once you get this 2.0 rolling, love to have you back to talk about that. Once you get that in like a footing where, because that sounds really exciting and interesting too, and it sounds like you're moving in a really positive direction. So when you get that, that'd be something to just kind of like break down and have a conversation around. But thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
I'll give you the last word here, and then Jeff, you can take us out.
Listen, you guys run a really good podcast. I mean, you get to the issues. I really appreciate that. The 2.0 is, I didn't want to be, the guy that came in just like threw water on the party, right? It's, all I was doing was like surviving and trying to regain my reputation, and then exposing what I saw as untruths that were harming society and average everyday people. But at the same time, I think people need to have hope, right? And I am actually more hopeful now than I've been since Ethereum, since 2015, right? I haven't been as hopeful now as I am right now. I see the cracks in their armor. I see them getting defensive. I see them acting in ways that are not normal for them. And they're acting in ways that they're scared, and they should be scared.
Give
So
them
I
enough rope
appreciate
to hang
it.
themselves. Right. So this was an outstanding conversation. Thank you for coming on with us tonight. Part one. Looking forward to part two. Got a lot more to unpack. Hang in there. We're gonna run a quick outro. We'll be back in the green room. And that's all we got tonight.
We'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you, Steve.
Thank
We'll
you.
be back. We'll be
And
back
for
here.
everybody who's listening, thank you.
Yeah, we'll get to those questions. Don't worry, guys. We'll eventually get to those questions. But yeah, hang around for a little bit, and we'll run this outro, and we'll see you in like 20 seconds, Steven. See you. Guys.
Are you down with OTC? Please like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when the next video drops.